This is the highest-rated American TV series in history, with its 5 seasons consistently maintaining a rating above 9. A certain authoritative review website even gave it an astonishing 99 points, and it was included in the Guinness World Records as the highest-rated TV series in history. At the time, it even defeated high-rated TV series like House of Cards and Game of Thrones, earning multiple Emmy nominations. Unlike most American TV series that start strong and lose momentum, Breaking Bad continuously pushes the plot to a climax. It can be said that those who haven't watched Breaking Bad are fortunate, because it's like a treasure waiting to be discovered. The story begins. A pair of trousers fell from the sky and were ruthlessly crushed by a speeding caravan. Driving is the show's protagonist Walter, who glances at his unconscious partner in the passenger seat with 2 dead bodies also in the vehicle. Walter, committing his first crime, is so anxious and panicked that he drives off the road and plunges into a ditch. Gasping for air, he runs out of the vehicle and in a fit of anger throws away his gas mask. To make matters worse, the sound of piercing sirens approaches from a distance, making the already frantic Walter even more bewildered. He doesn't know when he lost his pants, so he hurriedly puts on a green shirt. Then he takes a deep breath, dives back into the RV to take the dead man's handgun, and grabs a wallet and a camcorder from the passenger seat. Next, he starts to record his last will, because he knew he was at the end of his rope. Holding the handgun, he goes to the crossroads ready to fight the police in a life-or-death struggle. But what exactly is going on? The story actually starts 3 weeks earlier. Walter is an honest and upright chemistry teacher with a talent for chemistry. He was once a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. Today is Walter's 50th birthday, and his pregnant wife Skylar, as usual, uses plain bacon to spell out the number 50 to celebrate. At this time, Walter's disabled son Walter Jr. arrives late as usual, complaining about the lack of hot water and strongly demanding a new water heater. However, Walter Jr. doesn't know the hardships of family life. With Walter's salary alone to support a family of 4 and pay off the house mortgage, having such plain bacon is already quite good. Then Walter drove his car to school with his son. Out of his love for chemistry, his class becomes lively and interesting, but there are always some unruly students whispering below.
Chad, is there something wrong with your table? Okay, ionic bonds. Chapter 6.
To earn extra money to help the family, Walter works part-time as a cashier at a car wash after school. However, to save money, the car wash owner Bogdan often makes Walter, who is over 50, do double the work for the same pay. Although Walter is very resentful, he has to swallow his pride for the sake of living. But embarrassingly, that day Walter encounters one of his students at the car wash.
Hey, Mr. White! Make those tires shine, huh?
Oh my God! You would not believe who's cleaning Chad's car. Mr. White.
The teacher's last bit of dignity is ruthlessly trampled on by the student, and Walter can only silently endure, because Walter, who has lived half a lifetime, has already been worn down by life. When he gets home, Skylar has prepared a birthday party for him. She invited many friends and relatives to celebrate. Wearing the purple dress is Walter's sister-in-law Marie, and the man flaunting his gun is Marie's husband Hank. Hank is a local DEA agent, and no matter the situation, he always takes a dominant position. Walter Jr. watches his uncle's performance with admiration and strongly urges Walter to try holding the gun as well. Clearly, in Walter Jr.'s eyes, Walter seems like someone who has never seen the world. In Hank's eyes, Walter is also just an honest and upright chemistry teacher. Hank takes the wine glass from Walter's hand, making it seem like it's his birthday. After finishing his drink, he doesn't forget to turn on the TV to show everyone the news interview about himself. Meanwhile, Walter seems very out of place all by himself. Seeing the drug money captured by the police on the news, Walter is shocked. He had no idea this line of work could be so lucrative. Hank jokes that he could take Walter along on a drug raid to let him see more of the world. The next day, Walter arrives at the car wash for work and suddenly sees a stunning woman in a green dress at the door. He then coughs a few times, feeling a tightness in his chest, and then collapses to the ground. In the ambulance, The doctor conducts an emergency check, but Walter repeatedly asks to stop at the intersection, knowing he doesn't have the extra money for medical expenses, but the doctor firmly refuses. The doctor hears something problematic in Walter's lungs. At the hospital, after a lung examination, it turns out Walter is in the late stages of lung cancer and surgery isn't an option. He can only hope to live a few more years with chemotherapy. But at this moment, Walter doesn't seem very scared. Instead, his attention is focused on a stain on the doctor's coat. Back home, Walter doesn't tell his pregnant wife about his condition, knowing that their current financial situation can't afford the high medical costs. Walter returns to work at the car wash, where the harsh reality makes him a bit dazed. This scene is precisely witnessed by Bogdan, the stingy boss who comes over to demand Walter clean cars outside. Years of pent-up frustration finally explode in Walter at this moment.
You, Bogdan. What? I said you! And your eyebrows! Wipe down this!
Walter, who hasn't slept all night, sits by the pool early in the morning pondering life. He feels his life is like the match in his hand fleeting. After hesitating for a moment, he calls Hank, saying he wants to join him on a drug raid to broaden his horizons. And Walter's purpose is clear. He wants to earn a big sum of money for his family before he dies to ensure his wife and son are taken care of. Without any suspicion, Hank immediately agrees with Walter, but what Hank doesn't know is that this operation will bring out a notorious illegal trader. The drug raid progresses very smoothly, and within just a few minutes they have subdued several criminals. Hank receives a notice to check inside the house and asks Walter to wait in the car. Just then, a man in red underwear escapes from the second floor, and while trying to put on his pants, he falls down from the second story. Walter squints and sees that this man is none other than his former student Jesse. Jesse, seeing Walter in the car, is also shocked and tells him not to say anything before running away. Walter hurries out of the car, only seeing Jesse's red captain's license plate. Their paths are thus altered. In the evening, Walter uses the school's records to find Jesse's address. Jesse thinks Walter is there to persuade him to turn himself in, but to his surprise, Walter is there to discuss a partnership. Hearing this, Jesse almost laughs out loud, looking at Walter with disdain and stating that there's no way he would work with him. However, Walter threatens that if Jesse doesn't agree, he will go to the DEA and report him. Hearing this, Jesse's expression instantly freezes. The triumphant Walter then steals the necessary equipment from the school lab and heads straight to Jesse's place. Walter introduces Jesse to the equipment and its usage one by one. Jesse, with a look of disdain, says, "Do you think this is a chemistry class? This is contraband, understand?" Walter, not to be outdone, says that what Jesse is making is trash and a desecration of the art of chemistry. After their argument, they store the stuff in Jesse's garage. Since it's Walter's unilateral decision, Jesse won't let him create contraband in his house. But since they can't do this openly, Jesse suggests buying a used RV to do it in a secluded area in the suburbs. Walter agreed and took all his pension money out so Jesse could buy the RV. Seeing Walter's serious demeanor, Jesse reminds him this isn't a joke and asks him to think it over. However, Walter simply says,
I am awake.
What?
Buy the RV.
Jesse reluctantly follows Walter's plan. The scene shifts to Walter and his wife taking their disabled son clothes shopping, only to be unexpectedly mocked by a few men nearby. Skylar is about to confront them but is pulled back by Walter, who never causes trouble. Seeing Walter leave the scene, Skylar is quite speechless. Skylar comforts her son and then, with her pregnant belly, goes to stand up for her son. Unexpectedly, at that moment, Walter strides towards those men with a determination that brooks no kinship.
What are you doing?
What's wrong, Chief? Having a little trouble walking?
Get off me! Get off me!
I'll mess you up, man.
Well, you'll have one shot. You better make it good. What, are you waiting for your girlfriends? You better go. You better go. Take it. Take it. Take it!
By Walter takes Skylar by surprise. She never expected her man to suddenly become so bold, scaring off the thugs directly. Walter Jr. looks at his father's actions with sheer admiration. The next day, Jesse successfully purchases the RV. They drive the RV to a remote area on the outskirts, and after ensuring the area is safe, they decide to start their contraband project. However, Walter's next actions are something Jesse can't comprehend. "We're here to do the art of chemistry, not nude art. Why are you stripping down?" It turns out Walter doesn't want to bring any chemical smells back home. Next, they begin their first artistic creation. Jesse acts like a disruptive student in class, not taking things seriously, while Walter operates with the meticulousness of a scientist. As a wisp of yellow-green gas evaporates from the top of the RV, a batch of contraband with 99.1% purity crystals emerges. This is something Jesse has never seen in his years on the streets. He looks at Walter with admiration, giving high praise to what he has created. Yet Walter is dismissive, look at you acting like you've never seen the world. This is just basic chemistry. Jesse is eager to taste it but is stopped by Walter, who lays down the law. We'll just do it, we won't smoke it. Next it's Jesse's turn to perform. He needs to turn these artistic creations into cold hard cash. Jesse quickly finds the local illegal trader Crazy 8 and lets him sample the contraband he's brought, assuring him he's never seen anything of this caliber. Crazy 8 tries a bit and is indeed refreshed, so he asks Jesse about the source of the product. Jesse doesn't answer directly but expresses his condolences about the arrest of Emilio. It turns out that the person Hank and Walter caught during their drug raid was Crazy 8's cousin Emilio, and Jesse narrowly escaped capture by fleeing from the neighbor's house. Emilio is unhappy with Jesse's desertion at a critical moment. Jesse believes he escaped on his own skill and threatens to show Emilio a lesson when he sees him. However, Jesse doesn't know that Crazy 8 bailed Emilio out from the DEA that morning. Seeing Emilio walk out, Jesse can only submit and is coerced by them to go to the contraband production site in the outskirts. Crazy 8 takes out the prepared money, wanting to collaborate with Walter, but Emilio recognizes Walter, who was there on the day of his arrest. They think Jesse is the snitch, and in their anger they decide to eliminate Walter and Jesse. In the panic, Jesse accidentally trips and knocks himself unconscious. With no way out, Walter quickly thinks on his feet and says that he'll share the formula for the contraband if they let him and Jesse go. Crazy 8, having tasted what Walter made, feels the deal is very worthwhile, so he follows Walter into the RV. Emilio has a cigarette in his mouth, but Walter throws it out, citing the no smoking rule. Facing the armed threat from Emilio and Crazy 8, Walter carefully lights the fire, then grabs a bottle of red phosphorus from the table and dumps it into the pot. When Emilio and Crazy 8 aren't paying attention, instantly sparks fly and a large amount of toxic gas is produced. Walter uses all his strength to block the RV door. With several gunshots, the inside of the RV quickly goes quiet. He rushes to check on Jesse's injuries and frees him from the duct tape on his hands when suddenly he smells something burning. It turns out the cigarette but Emilio threw out has ignited some dry grass. Seeing the fire growing, Walter has no choice but to put on gas masks for himself and Jesse, then drive away from the scene. The rearview mirror still has the pants he didn't have time to put on, which are blown away by the strong wind, linking back to the opening scene. Gun in hand, Walter is ready to end his own life, but having never fired a gun, he has no idea how to use it. Listening to the increasingly close sound of sirens, Walter falls into deep despair. When he sees that the approaching vehicles are actually fire trucks, he realizes he's been scaring himself all along. When he sees that the approaching vehicles are actually fire trucks, he realizes he's been scaring himself all along. At this moment, Jesse wakes up from his unconscious state. Walter explains everything that happened and Jesse can only shake his head in resignation. Afterward, they call a tow truck to pull the RV out of the ditch. Seeing the two acting suspicious, the driver takes the opportunity to charge them extra. They get into the vehicle and Jesse suggests dumping the RV directly into the river, but Walter disagrees because he bought the RV with all his savings. He plans to clean it and then resell it. Since Jesse lives alone, although very unwillingly, Walter decides to temporarily park the RV at Jesse's place. Walter says that after they clean up this mess, they'll go their separate ways as if nothing ever happened. Jesse agrees. Because the RV has ignition problems due to the collision, Walter tries several times before getting the vehicle started. They excitedly high-five to celebrate, but they are completely unaware of the gas mask Walter threw outside. Just then they hear a noise from the back of the RV. They go to check and find that one person is not dead. It seems their cleanup work just got more complicated. Back home, Walter cleans the money left by Crazy 8 and hides it, then cautiously goes to bed. Skylar is puzzled by his behavior over the past few days and reminds Walter not to keep secrets from her. Walter can only pretend everything is fine as he comforts his pregnant wife. The next morning, Walter chats about trivial topics at the breakfast table. Just then the phone rings, but Walter doesn't answer. The call goes to voicemail. Hearing that it's Jesse, Walter quickly goes to answer. Jesse is at home, unsure how to deal with the bodies and very anxious for Walter to come over quickly. Walter deliberately changes the subject, saying he's having breakfast with his family, and quietly reminds Jesse to calm down. He'll come over after school. Walter then hung up the phone, but Skylar, suspicious, feels something is off. As soon as Walter leaves, she redials the phone. Jesse guesses it couldn't have been Walter calling, so he doesn't answer. The call goes to voicemail and Skylar picks up some information about Jesse. After school, Walter goes to the lab to get 2 buckets of hydrofluoric acid to take to Jesse's house. At that moment, Jesse is applying makeup to cover his wounds. Suddenly, he hears the sound of a door opening outside. Looking out the window, he sees indeed the RV's door has been opened. Jesse, baseball bat in hand, cautiously goes downstairs to check and finds the duct tape on the ground where it fell off. He goes into the RV and discovers Crazy 8 is no longer there. Under the broad daylight, a half-dead person was wandering on the street. A scene that Walter on his way to Jesse's house happened to notice. Seeing this familiar figure, a panicked Walter quickly turned his car around and chased after him, continuously calling out to the delirious Crazy 8. Crazy 8 vaguely heard someone calling his name, and when he turned around it was as if he saw a demon, which frightened him so much that he took off running, but the next moment was tragic.
You make me feel good, you move my feet, I wanna sing and shout.
Walter got out of his car, looked around to see that no one was nearby, and then hurriedly dragged Crazy 8 into his car and took him away. Soon, Crazy 8 was brought back by Walter to the basement of Jesse's house. The two of them stood there dumbfounded, not knowing what to do next. They went upstairs to discuss a strategy. Walter asked Jesse about Crazy 8's character, fantasizing that Crazy 8 was someone who could be reasoned with, but remembering that just yesterday they were at gunpoint. Walter concluded that Crazy 8 didn't seem like a decent person at all. Jesse advised Walter not to be naive. Crazy 8 was a thoroughly vile and evil person, and if they let him go, he would surely seek revenge on them later. Just then, they heard Crazy 8's voice from the basement, which terrified Jesse. He regretted that they hadn't tied Crazy 8 up earlier, so the two of them grabbed baseball bats and went down to check, and seeing Crazy 8 still unconscious, Jesse hurried to the garage. Jesse unlocked the big lock he used for his motorcycle, even tried it on his own neck to make sure it was working fine, and then thoughtfully put it on Crazy 8. Only then did they feel somewhat at ease to discuss their plans. Walter suggested using hydrofluoric acid to dissolve Emilio's body, but they had to kill the still-living Crazy 8 before proceeding with that step. Clearly, the latter task was much more challenging. Although Jesse wanted no part in either task, Walter forced him to choose one. To be fair, Walter decided to use a coin toss to determine their roles. Reluctantly, Jesse chose heads, meaning he would handle Emilio's body if the coin landed that way. The coin landed heads up, and unashamed Walter wanted a best 2 out of 3, but Jesse firmly refused. Walter, drinking sullenly, pondered how to deal with Crazy 8. That's when Jesse called, saying he couldn't find a suitable container. Walter reminded him that any plastic tub would do. Jesse, looking at the flimsy plastic tub, felt it couldn't withstand the acid's corrosion. Walter got angry when he heard this, telling Jesse that strong acids wouldn't corrode plastic products. Didn't he know that? Jesse, tired of Walter's lectures, changed the subject to ask how his task was progressing. However, Walter hadn't made any progress. Jesse reminded Walter to get rid of Crazy 8 as soon as possible, and then he went through the shop picking out plastic buckets. Unfortunately, the biggest ones in the shop didn't fit the whole person. Meanwhile, Walter also began choosing the right tools to deal with Crazy 8. But Walter, having never killed anyone, found himself unable to go through with it using any method. At that moment, he noticed a plastic bag in his hand and thought perhaps suffocation was the least bloody way to do it. So Walter, with the plastic bag in hand, cautiously approached the basement, but to his utter surprise, Crazy 8 had regained consciousness. This frightened Walter so much that he dropped the plastic bag and ran. Crazy 8, who hadn't had water in 2 days, pleaded with Walter for a drink. Instead of killing Crazy 8, Walter turned into a temporary caretaker, tending to him with food and drink. Crazy 8 asked about Emilio's condition, but Walter remained silent. Crazy 8 realized Emilio must be dead. Back upstairs, the depressed Walter saw the contraband that Jesse had hidden on the table, though he never smoked. At this moment he wanted a hit to ease his mind. His joint rolling technique was absolutely top-notch, and his method of lighting it was simple and rough. The taste wasn't bad, though it was a bit harsh on the throat. Just as Walter was lost in the smoky haze, Jesse, who had gone out to shop, came back. Seeing Walter in such a stupor, Jesse couldn't help but lament that the once honest and straightforward chemistry teacher had now become like this. Walter asked him about his purchases, but Jesse said he hadn't bought anything because he couldn't find a large plastic tub anywhere in town that could fit a whole person. Walter scolded him, asking, "Can't you use your brain to buy 2 smaller plastic tubs and then cut the body into pieces to fit?" Apparently, Jesse hadn't thought of this cruel method, and he asked Walter if he's taken care of Crazy 8. and Walter remained silent. Just then, Jesse heard coughing from the basement. It seemed Walter hadn't dealt with Crazy 8 yet. Walter glanced at his watch and suddenly remembered his wife's scheduled prenatal checkup, so he quickly got up and left, promising Jesse that he would sort out his own issues tomorrow.
We flipped a coin! We flipped a coin!
At the hospital, the checkup showed that the baby was very healthy and also a girl. Exactly what Walter had been hoping for, but the thought of not being able to be there for his daughter as she grew up made it hard for Walter to feel happy. After the doctor left, Skylar confronted Walter, asking who Jesse was, as she had already found information about Jesse through phone records, and with Walter's strange behavior over the past 2 days, Skylar wouldn't rest until she got some answers. Walter had no choice but to lie and say that Jesse sold him contraband. Skylar berated Walter, saying he must be out of his mind. Walter admitted he had been a bit depressed these past few days, but his love for Skylar was unchanging, and he begged her to forgive him just this once. Meanwhile, Jesse was numbing himself with his stash, and in his excitement, he went to the RV to deal with Emilio's body, but just as Jesse was getting the body out of the RV, Skylar found Jesse after a maternity checkup. Seeing the body about to be discovered, Jesse tried to avoid the situation, but Skylar charged in and Jesse hurriedly tried to stop her. Jesse thought Skylar was there to sell something, but when Skylar introduced herself and said that Walter had confessed everything to her, Jesse broke out in a cold sweat. Skylar warned Jesse that her brother-in-law was a DEA agent, and if Jesse sold contraband to her husband again, she would make him regret it. Relieved, Jesse quickly promised not to mess with Walter anymore. Seeing Jesse obediently listen, Skylar finally left, but not without reminding him to turn over a new leaf. Jesse quickly agreed, and he breathed a sigh of relief because Skylar hadn't discovered the body. Jesse hurriedly closed the door to prevent anyone from coming back in. Frightened, Jesse hurried back inside and took a few hits of his contraband. With excitement, he dragged Emilio's body into the bathroom. Jesse muttered to himself as if performing a ritual for Emilio's soul. Then, with all his strength, Jesse placed Emilio in the bathtub and began pouring the acid in, finally completing his task. Afterwards, Jesse took a few hits of his contraband to calm his nerves. By this time, Walter had also finished his errands and came back. An angry Jesse confronted Walter about why he hid the fact that he had a DEA agent in the family. He told Walter about his wife's visit and also blamed Walter for lying about him selling contraband. But Walter argued that it was still better than telling the truth, and Jesse had no energy to argue back. Just then, Walter smelled Jesse using contraband. Before Walter could start criticizing, Jesse's defiance grew strong, saying, "It's my place. I call the shots." And he had already taken care of Emilio. Jesse even turned the tables on Walter for making him run all over town for stupid plastic tubs, saying his bathtub was perfectly sufficient and didn't require dismembering the body. Hearing this, Walter instantly collapsed. Calling him a stupid pig of a teammate, Walter hurried to the hallway to check the ceiling, which had already been corroded through by the acid. Walter grabbed Jesse and they quickly backed away. Then the ceiling, which had been eaten through by the acid, fell down directly.
Plastic container I asked you to buy. You see, hydrofluoric acid won't eat through plastic. It will, however, dissolve metal, rock, glass, ceramic. So there's that.
At that moment, Jesse finally understood the importance of knowledge. Walter never dreamed he could bring up such a foolish student, despite his repeated warnings that strong acids would corrode anything except plastic. Jesse still used the bathtub to dissolve the body. The harsh reality gave Jesse a good lesson. Now the two had work to do. They would spend hours cleaning up the bloodstains on the floor. During the cleanup, Walter reminisced about his early days starting a business. Back then, Walter was full of spirit, researching the elemental composition of the human body with his then-girlfriend Gretchen. However, even when they added up all the elements, they didn't reach 100%. Perhaps the missing part was the weight of the human soul. After cleaning up the mess, Jesse and Walter washed the blood off each other. Once they were clean, Jesse found his hidden contraband and eagerly took a few hits to relieve his depressed mood. Walter, meanwhile, went back to the basement to continue his role as Crazy 8's attentive caretaker. Just as Walter was about to leave, Crazy 8, tied to the pillar, stopped him, knowing that Emilio was dead and that if he didn't act, his fate would be the same as Emilio's. Crazy 8 intentionally said Walter's name and remarked that this line of work wasn't suitable for him. Walter was surprised that Crazy 8 knew so much about him. He thought they had pressured Jesse into talking about him, but Crazy 8 deliberately sowed discord, saying Jesse was a big mouth who hadn't kept Walter's secrets. Hearing this, Walter immediately went upstairs to confront Jesse. Seeing Jesse refusing to open the door, Walter kicked it in. He found Jesse indulging himself, which infuriated Walter, so he went straight to Jesse and started a physical altercation. He found the items Jesse had hidden in the toilet tank, intending to throw them away, while Jesse desperately tried to protect them. The result was that the two of them started fighting.
It's worth nothing when you smoke it all.
Jesse took advantage of Walter's distraction and ran downstairs, with Walter immediately chasing after him. But Walter, older and sick, couldn't keep up with the younger Jesse. Just as Jesse was about to drive away, Walter hurriedly caught up.
Where the hell do you think you're going?
Hey, back off, man! Jesus!
We've got work to do!
No, you got work to do. I did my part.
You mean that obscenity that I spent the last 2 hours cleaning up? That is your contribution?
Yo, kiss my pink ass, man! I didn't ask for any of this! Alright, how am I supposed to live here now, huh? My whole house smells like toe cheese and dry cleaning!
Because you didn't follow my instructions!
Oh, well, Heil Hitler! And let me tell you something else. We flipped a coin, okay? You and me. You and me! Coin flip is sacred!
Walter was left speechless by Jesse's retorts and could only watch him drive away. On the other side, Skylar, knowing about Walter's recent odd behavior, suspected it was due to using contraband. She pretended to say she had written a novel character who used contraband and wanted to interview Marie about her experiences using contraband in college. This made the suspicious Marie think that her nephew, Walter Jr., was using contraband, so she asked her husband Hank to talk to Walter Jr. about it. Hank, utterly devoted to his wife Marie, listened to her every word and didn't dare neglect her requests. Soon, Hank took Walter Jr. to a chaotic place, with a clueless Walter Jr. not understanding what his uncle was up to. Hank randomly called a woman over and showed Walter Jr. her teeth, saying this was the consequence of using contraband. After the humiliation, Hank told the woman to scram and then started asking his grandnephew how he felt. However, Walter Jr.'s response surprised him.
Cool.
By evening, Walter was still at Jesse's house, engaged in a fierce internal debate. He listed many reasons not to kill Crazy 8, but if he lets him go, he will take revenge on his family. So it seems that Crazy 8 has to die. Seeing it was getting late, Walter hurriedly called his wife to explain that he was working overtime at the car wash. But what Walter didn't expect was that Skylar had already investigated and found out he had quit his job 2 weeks ago. Seeing his lie exposed, Walter could only comfort his wife by saying he would explain everything when he got home. But by then, Skylar was already angry and hung up the phone. Just then, Walter heard Crazy 8 asking for food again. Reluctantly, Walter started playing the caretaker again, even thoughtfully cutting off the crusts of the bread that Crazy 8 didn't like. However, just as Walter was bringing the plate down to the basement, he suddenly started coughing uncontrollably and then collapsed to the ground, the plate shattering in his hand. After who knows how long, Walter finally woke up. Crazy 8 was surprised to see someone faint from coughing for the first time. Walter was frank and admitted he had lung cancer. Then he cleaned up the broken plate and prepared to make Crazy 8 another sandwich. Seeing the beer in the fridge, Walter decided to have a good talk with Crazy 8. Through their conversation, Walter learned that Crazy 8 was a local, born and raised, and his father owned a local furniture store. Walter had even bought a baby crib from him for his son. It's a small world. He never imagined that years later they would meet in such a way. Crazy 8, a man with high emotional intelligence, guessed that Walter was manufacturing contraband because he had cancer and wanted to leave some money for his family before he died. Crazy 8 again urged Walter that this line of work wasn't for him and advised him to stop as soon as possible. He even offered Walter money for treatment if he let him go. Why take such a big risk to produce contraband? At that moment, Walter was swayed, at a time when he needed comfort and understanding the most. The clever Crazy 8 took advantage of his vulnerability. Moved by compassion, Walter decided to go upstairs to get the keys to release Crazy 8. He found the keys Jesse had hidden and then drank the beer in his hand. However, just as he was about to throw the bottle in the trash, he suddenly saw the broken plate shards he had thrown away. At that moment, a terrible thought crossed his mind. He hurriedly took out the broken pieces of the plate and tried to piece them together, but he couldn't make the plate whole again. At this moment, Walter was deeply saddened. He had already decided to release him, so why wouldn't Crazy 8 let go of him? Walter went to the basement and pretended to help Crazy 8 unlock the door. Sure enough, he saw that Crazy 8's hand was preparing to take out the pieces of the plate hidden in his pocket.
Are you gonna stick me with that broken piece of plate?
Reluctantly, Walter chose self-preservation. After a fierce struggle, the disadvantaged Crazy 8 eventually couldn't escape death. It was Walter's first time killing someone, and he was deeply disturbed, repeatedly muttering apologies. The next day, Jesse came back from outside. He saw that the RV had been tidied up and Crazy 8 was nowhere to be seen in the basement. He realized that Walter had dealt with Crazy 8. The ever-punctual Walter had also taken sick leave from school, with the vice principal covering his classes. Seeing the students' disappointed faces, it was clear they preferred Walter's lessons. The disappearance of Crazy 8 had also caught the attention of the DEA. Hank and his colleague found their RV in the suburbs and discovered Walter's high-purity contraband inside. Nearby, they also found the gas mask Walter had thrown away. On the other side, a relieved Walter returned home, and to dispel his wife's worries, he decided not to hide his illness anymore.
Skylar, there's something I have to tell you.
What would be the consequences of offending a highly intelligent chemistry teacher? Just now Walter was driving to the bank to deposit some money. After waiting for a long time for a parking spot, Ken sped into it just before Walter could park. No matter how Walter honked in protest, Ken, who was on the phone, completely ignored him. Walter was seething with anger. Seeing Ken's arrogant license plate, Walter had no choice but to swallow his anger for the time being. In the bank lobby, Ken continued his phone conversation oblivious to others' feelings and was even using a fashionable Bluetooth headset at the time. You should know in the early 2000s, Bluetooth headsets were considered high-tech items. Every action Ken took displayed his sense of superiority. The parking spot-deprived Walter glared fiercely at Ken, thinking that he would teach Ken a lesson if he got the chance. As luck would have it, Walter got his chance soon after at a gas station where he ran into the show-off Ken. While Ken was in the store, Walter casually picked up a mop with water from the gas station, then naturally opened the hood of Ken's convertible BMW and placed the mop on the battery's terminals. With sparks flying, Walter carefully closed the hood and then left nonchalantly without looking back. It must be said that from this point on Walter began to slowly turn to the dark side, with the evil aspects of human nature increasingly manifesting in him. The reason Walter came to the bank was to deposit the money he brought in another way for his own use. Because his wife already knew about his condition, Skylar insisted on treating Walter even without money. Skylar enlisted the help of Hank and Marie to persuade Walter. Skylar planned to borrow money from friends and relatives, but Walter, due to his pride, refused to agree. He said he could take an advance on his pension. After his wife left, he took out the money he had hidden, ready to transfer it at the bank so he could use it for himself. This was the money left by the deceased Crazy 8, which in Skylar's eyes was of dubious origin. Just then, his son Walter Jr. burst in, and a panicked Walter quickly explained that he was catching a mouse. His son was puzzled by Walter's recent strange behavior. Walter Jr. left without listening to his explanation. Facing his son's misunderstanding, Walter could only silently accept it. On the way to the bank, Walter suddenly noticed a police car following him. Having done something bad, Walter felt like a startled bird and quickly hid the illicit money. Seeing that the police car was about to catch up, a panicked Walter began to slowly pull over, but the police car just zoomed past him. Once again scared by his own fears, Walter couldn't help but laugh at himself. The scene shifts to Jesse's house at night, where his friend Combo was invited over. Seeing a large hole burn through the ceiling in the hallway, Combo asked Jesse what had happened. Jesse quickly explained and then hurriedly changed the subject. Combo asked if Jesse was still into art, seemingly wanting to try some for free. They also mentioned Crazy 8 and Emilio. Jesse clearly stated that he didn't know their current situation, but he looked a bit guilty. The two friends trusted Jesse completely and didn't have the slightest doubt. Combo kept asking Jesse to share some contraband, wanting to have a good time at the bar with friends. Jesse planned to cash in on the contraband he had made with Walter, so he said he had a batch of top-tier stuff that they had never seen before. This piqued Combo's curiosity, but Jesse knew the potency of this contraband and didn't want his friends to get into trouble for the sake of their health. However, his friend thought Jesse was being stingy and turned to leave. To keep his two friends, Jesse reluctantly took out the hidden contraband to share. After a night of dealing with his contraband, Jesse was in a daze. Suddenly he saw two figures in black armor stopping at his front door. One of them was holding a large machete and the other was approaching with a grenade in hand. Soon the sound of knocking scared Jesse into scrambling away, but he didn't forget to take his contraband with him and then he fled frantically through the back door. However, what Jesse didn't realize was that all this was just a hallucination. The ones knocking were just two students handing out advertisements. With nowhere else to go, Jesse shamelessly went to his parents' house, even getting his foot stuck in a chair indicating he had likely climbed over the wall to sneak in. Because Jesse is a substance user, his parents treat him badly and look at him with disgust. He goes to the room where he used to live as a child, and the pictures he drew a long time ago are still hanging there. Exhausted, Jesse fell asleep immediately and didn't wake up until the next evening. His parents were discussing whether Jesse should stay and were suspicious of needle marks on his arms. Finally, Jesse woke up starving after not eating all day and asked his mother when dinner would be. It seemed he was planning to stay for a while. His mother awkwardly asked if he needed help washing his clothes, actually expressing her disgust at his dirtiness, but Jesse politely refused. Seeing Jesse head towards the dining room, his father decided to confront him, ready to kick him out if he hadn't turned over a new leaf. But seeing Jesse earnestly cleaning the table, the couple ultimately didn't have the heart to say anything. Jesse knew his parents' thoughts better than anyone. He just didn't want to argue about it. Jesse came to his younger brother Jake's room to see a wall full of medals of honor. It is clear that this younger brother in the minds of his parents is much better than him. Jesse was proud of his accomplished brother and wanting to fulfill his responsibility as an elder sibling, planned to take Jake out to talk about life. However, his mother worried that Jesse might lead Jake astray. She frequently came in to check on them and deliberately left the door open to prevent Jesse from doing anything inappropriate.
You see this? What am I, some criminal or something?
Whatever.
Whatever? Why, you think that's okay? Like, oh, we can't let that scumbag warp the mind of our favorite son.
I'm the favorite? Yeah, right. Practically all they ever talk about.
Frustrated, Jesse was left to brood alone in the yard. Back in bed, he tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Insomnia led him to open his closet. Looking at the toys he played with as a child and many of his favorite paintings, one in particular made Jesse laugh. The theme of the painting was his former chemistry teacher Walter, with a caption asking why Walter loved chemistry so much. On the back was one of his own poorly done chemistry papers, complete with comments from Walter. Clearly, Jesse was not interested in chemistry. His talent was in painting. Seeing these, Jesse once again thought of his recent regrettable experiences with Walter. Just then, his friend Combo called him, saying that the goods he gave him the previous day had been sold out in minutes and asked if he had any more since many people were eagerly waiting for his supply. Unfortunately, Jesse indeed had none left. Hearing that the goods were in high demand, Jesse went to Walter the next day to see if he was still interested in continuing their contraband venture, but Walter, seeing him, was furious, thinking Jesse was there to set him up. When he hears what Jesse came for, Walter tells him to get lost. Then Jesse took out the money he had earned from selling the goods, saying he hadn't touched those items, that he had converted all the contraband into cash, and that this $4,000 was Walter's share. After saying this, Jesse threw the money into the air and left coolly, leaving Walter standing there dumbfounded. Seeing Jesse had gone and being short on cash himself, Walter quickly grabbed a nearby net. Though it was ill-gotten gains, the financially struggling Walter couldn't care less at this point. Jesse had just gotten home when his parents began treating him like a criminal again because the nanny had just found contraband in his room while cleaning. His parents, already looking for a legitimate reason to kick him out, now had irrefutable evidence. Seeing that his parents had issued an eviction order, a resigned Jesse grabbed his cigarette and left voluntarily. As Jesse waited for a car at the door, his underage brother Jake came out from the house. Surprisingly, the cigarette was actually his. Jake thanked his brother for taking the blame for him and pleaded for Jesse to return the cigarette. But as an elder brother, how could Jesse let his brother go down the wrong path? He crushed the cigarette right in front of Jake. However, Jesse didn't bother to defend himself because he knew his parents' perception of him. no matter what he said, they would never believe him. Both sons had tendencies to dabble in forbidden substances, which was enough to show that there were problems with the parents' upbringing. Meanwhile, Walter's wife took him to see the best local doctor. The doctor said his teen was very experienced and suggested that Walter undergo radiation and chemotherapy, noting their high success rate. But upon hearing about the possible side effects, Walter felt he couldn't accept them. Back at home, Skylar was constantly trying to convince Walter, telling him there was still a good chance his illness could be cured and discussing specific treatment times. But Walter seemed indifferent. He confessed to his wife that he didn't plan to undergo treatment because it would cost at least $90,000 and might not save his life. No matter how much his wife tried to persuade him, the stubborn Walter insisted, as he didn't want his family to bear such a huge burden. However, all of this was overheard by Walter Jr. Seeing how stubborn Walter was, Walter Jr. angrily said,
"Then why don't you just die already? Just give up and die."
What would you do if you had a son like this? Because he had no college degree, no professional certification, no work experience, and was a high school dropout, Jesse was ruthlessly mocked by the interviewer, who said that the model walking outside the window was more suited for him. At that moment, Jesse wished he could find a hole to crawl into. After facing such rejection, he stormed out, deeply regretting not having studied harder, which had led to this outcome. Just then, the model from the advertisement called out to him. Coincidentally, it was his friend Badger. They found a secluded spot to talk. Badger explained that he was on probation and needed to find a job to prove he had reformed. Like Jesse, he hadn't studied hard and could only find this kind of job. But Badger was just there to put on a show. The next second, Badger began asking Jesse if he could get some more contraband. Jesse said he had washed his hands of that life, decided to reform and start over. Hearing this, Badger is amazed, and he laments the need for someone of Jesse's caliber. Because Badger had once tried the crystal-grade contraband that Jesse and Walter had created, the profound impression it left on him was unforgettable. Jesse mentioned that his partner didn't follow the usual rules, leading to fewer and fewer clients. Actually, he was talking about Walter. Jesse had wanted to continue the partnership with Walter, but Walter had coldly rejected him. He knew that without Walter, he couldn't produce contraband of such high purity, so he decided to leave the trade and seek a new job. But Badger said he had channels for selling and that they were all big buyers. He proposed that they get back into the contraband business together. Seeing that it was almost time to go to work, Badger left in a hurry, instructing Jesse to think it over carefully. Jesse returned to his car and saw many job advertisements in the newspaper, but not a single one he qualified for. Reluctantly, he decided to go back to his old ways with Badger. After work, Badger rushed to Jesse's house, bringing a big bag full of snacks. Seeing the bullet holes in the RV door, a puzzled Badger asked what had happened. Jesse awkwardly explained that they were for ventilation. Badger was really easy to deceive. Seeing all sorts of bottles and jars, Badger was amazed, having never seen anything like this before. Just like Walter had done for him, Jesse explained the purpose of these bottles to Badger. Hearing Jesse speak so knowledgeably, Badger, who only finished elementary school, looked at Jesse with even more admiration. Proudly, Jesse told Badger, "This is just basic chemistry." That was exactly what Walter had once told him. Jesse checked the food supplies that Badger had brought and decided to officially start working. Unexpectedly, Badger also brought a crossbow, saying it was for hunting wild boars. It seems that Badger is even more adventurous than Jesse. The two drove to a remote area in the suburbs to start their first collaboration. At this moment, Jesse was in the same position Walter had been in initially. Seeing the mischievous Badger, he felt like he was looking at his former self. With the experience of making it together with Walter, the previously inattentive Jesse was exceptionally dedicated this time. After a day and night of hard work, Jesse finally produced the finished product. Badger was extremely excited, thinking they were going to make a fortune. However, Jesse stared at the product, clearly disappointed with what he had made. Looking at the murky crystals, they couldn't compare at all to the contraband Walter had produced, but the less demanding Badger was very satisfied with them. Wanting to make something as good as Walter's, Jesse ruthlessly dumped the freshly made product. Badger, seeing this, became irate and ranted at Jesse. Unable to understand his actions, Jesse also made his stance clear, saying he would continue until he was satisfied. However, when the second batch still didn't meet Jesse's standards, and as he was about to dump it and start over, Badger disagreed. The two began a heated argument.
3 entire pounds of pseudo wasted! Do you know how long I had to spin that stupid sign?
Get off me, psycho!
Helicopter!
In the chaos, Jesse grabbed some chemical materials and attacked Badger, then forcefully pushed him out of the car. The partnership that had just started that day was officially disbanded. Meanwhile, Walter and his wife were invited to attend the birthday party of his friend Elliot. Elliot was the co-founder of Gray Matter, a company they started together when Walter was younger. Due to various reasons, Walter chose to leave, but now the company had gone public and made them billionaires. Although they seldom contacted each other, Skylar still insisted on taking Walter to the party. Even though the invitation explicitly stated no gifts, Skylar insisted that Walter prepare a small present. However, upon arriving at the venue, they discovered that others had brought large gifts, making Walter's palm-sized gift seem embarrassing. After meeting his old friend, they exchanged a few pleasantries. Elliot's wife was Gretchen, who had been Walter's girlfriend back in the day. It seemed there had been a love triangle, and Walter, unable to cope, chose to leave and let them be together. However, time is the best healer and Walter didn't hold a grudge, maintaining a proper relationship with them. Later, Walter visited Elliot's study, where the luxurious decor and the plethora of books filled him with envy. Looking at Elliot's honors on the wall, most of the research that made Gray Matter successful was actually Walter's. After leaving the study and seeing Skylar chatting with Elliot, Walter was about to join them but was stopped by an old classmate. The old classmate introduced Walter to his friends, saying that in college, Walter was a master of crystallography and one of the founders of Gray Matter. Walter was happy to explain the origin of the company's name. They assumed Walter was still Elliot's partner and thus must be very wealthy. However, Walter quickly explained that he preferred to focus on education. When others asked which university he was at, Walter, the high school chemistry teacher, was too embarrassed to say. But what made him even more uncomfortable was when Elliot began to open the gifts in front of everyone. Seeing that the other gifts were very expensive, Walter became anxious, fearing that Elliot would open his gift. Yet the workings of Murphy's Law were about to unfold.
Oh, this is from Walt.
Hey.
Yum good ramen. This is what Walt and I lived on for 10 months straight while we were working on our thesis. Sold them down at Ralstos in the hardware aisle, right next to the what was it?
Sterno.
The Sterno.
Yeah, 10 for $1.99.
To this day, I am convinced these noodles were responsible for our success. This was our lifeblood. Man, where'd you find these? I thought they'd been outlawed years ago. I love it. Thank you, Walt.
For the man who has everything.
Fortunately, Elliot noticed Walter's intentions, which spared the prideful Walter from embarrassment. They then reminisced about the past, and seeing how happy they both looked proved they had shared good times. Just then, Elliot proposed that Walter come back to work at Gray Matter, thinking of how he had already left Gray Matter, and due to pride, Walter politely declined Elliot's offer. But when Elliot mentioned that the company had the best medical insurance, Walter realized something was off. Could it be that Elliot knew about his lung cancer? At that moment, he noticed his wife chatting with Gretchen, occasionally glancing his way. Walter then realized the true purpose of his wife's insistence on attending the party. Angry, Walter quickly found an excuse to leave with his wife. No matter how Skylar tried to make conversation, the infuriated Walter didn't want to engage, because Walter guessed that Elliot's recruitment was his wife's idea. To get the extremely proud Walter to accept their help, they had deliberately recruited him to work at Gray Matter, but in Walter's eyes, this felt like begging for charity, something he absolutely couldn't accept. Skylar's plan thus failed. Back at home, the atmosphere became unusually quiet, with no one initiating conversation. At that moment, his son prepared to go to school. Walter, as usual, was ready to drive him, but his son said he would take the school bus. It was clear that Walter Jr. had become alienated from his father. After school, feeling gloomy, Walter Jr. decided to go buy beer with his friends to lighten the mood. However, they were all underage and buying alcohol was illegal, so they decided to have Walter Jr., who was on crutches, ask a passerby for help. Ironically, after careful observation, the person they asked turned out to be a police officer. His two friends unkindly abandoned Walter Jr. and ran away. Since it was Walter Jr.'s first offense, the officer gave him a warning and said that Walter Jr. was lucky to have such a good dad. However, The person who showed up was Hank. Hank was also worried that Walter Jr.'s actions would anger Walter. Back at home, Skylar told her son to go to his room and wait to be dealt with. Seeing that Walter was not at home, Hank asked Skylar not to tell Walter about what had just happened, saying that Walter Jr.'s actions were just part of growing up, first with controlled substances and then wanting to drink. Hearing this, Skylar looked completely baffled, and Hank turned to Marie with a similarly confused expression. Marie said to her sister, "Wasn't it you who hinted at me?" At this moment, Skylar realized what was being said. She clarified that she was referring to Walter and that it was something Walter himself had admitted. Hank finally understood why Walter Jr. had reacted the way he did when he went to the chaotic gathering place. Hank was truly embarrassed as he could never have imagined Walter getting involved in such things. Skylar mentioned that Walter had been acting unusually lately, like refusing treatment for his illness and not accepting help with medical bills. She wanted Hank and Marie to stay and help persuade Walter. Walter didn't return home until the next morning, and when he walked in, he found several people who had been waiting for a long time. Skylar was the first to take the talking pillow and began persuading Walter to accept treatment. Then the pillow was passed to Hank, who said a lot and gave various examples, but the distracted Walter didn't understand. When it was Walter Jr.'s turn to speak, he stuttered, saying Walter was like a coward because he didn't even have the courage to fight the disease. He picked up his crutches and said that he was fighting bravely against his injury and you were afraid of a little chemo treatment. His son's words brought tears to Walter's eyes. Then it was Marie's turn to speak. Clearly, she hadn't understood her sister's intentions. She expressed respect for Walter's choice. As a medical professional, she understood better than anyone the pain many patients endure during treatment, and she thought that Walter wanting to live out his last days with dignity might be his wish. Hank also agreed with Marie's perspective. This made Skylar furious and she immediately issued an eviction order to them. As the two sisters argued vehemently, the silent Walter finally exploded. He took the pillow from Marie's arms and seized this opportunity to express his own thoughts. Reflecting on his life, he realized he had hardly ever made choices for himself and now he was facing cancer, which would be his final decision. He didn't want to endure the torment of the disease in his final days. He knew the side effects of chemotherapy better than anyone, and his death would be gruesome. He didn't want to leave his family with that image. He said he chose to let nature take its course. However, when he woke up the next day and saw books on how to beat cancer on his bedside, he knew his wife's biggest fear was losing him. For his wife's sake, Walter changed his mind again. He decided not to let his wife worry anymore and accepted the hospital treatment. Then Walter drove to Jesse's house. At that moment, Gretchen called because she had heard about Walter's lung cancer. She said she and Elliot were willing to pay for Walter's treatment, but she was still refused by the prideful Walter. Walter lied about having insurance and told them not to worry. Then he went to Jesse's house. He would earn money his own way.
Yeah! Wanna cook?
This is the most pivotal episode in Breaking Bad where the protagonist Walter begins to actively defy his destiny. Imagine a man middle-aged, burdened by life, with elderly parents above and young children below, who was diagnosed with lung cancer at a time when his family needs him the most. As the pillar of the household, what he is most concerned about is naturally his wife and children. He thinks that even if he dies, he must strive to ensure that his wife and children live a life free from want. From then on, an honest and diligent chemistry teacher steps onto a path of no return, which seems to be the only choice given by fate. The reason Breaking Bad is so compelling is that it brilliantly captures Walter's psychological journey in the face of desperate circumstances, making it seem like everyone can see a bit of themselves in this series. In the previous episode, Walter decides to undergo chemotherapy so as not to worry his wife, but his strong pride prevents him from accepting help from the Elliot couple, so he seeks out Jesse, hoping they can collaborate again. Learning from the lessons of their first partnership, Walter lays down 3 rules with Jesse, stating that he will only handle the back-end operations while Jesse takes full responsibility for the business side. Finally, Walter sets his bottom line: no matter what happens, there must be no more bloodshed or violence. However, what Walter doesn't know is that the path he has chosen often leads to situations beyond one's control. After watching, you realize how a person's moral boundaries are breached step by step. The scene shifts to the hospital where Skylar carefully looks after Walter, who is on an IV drip. Walter insists he can take care of himself and asks her to go home to cook for their son. Before leaving, Skylar doesn't forget to ask if Walter received financial help from Elliot. Walter lies, saying he has already received it and has taken care of it by depositing the money in the bank. so his wife need not worry. Skylar is overjoyed to hear that Walter has accepted assistance from others, but what she doesn't know is that the money was earned by Walter himself. From then on, Walter becomes a master of time management. He teaches at school during the day and goes to the outskirts to pursue his contraband production after school. Due to the side effects of chemotherapy, Walter suddenly feels dizzy and struggles to get out of the car. Seeing this, Jesse quickly goes to help and supports Walter to sit down and rest for a while. However, when Walter unbuttons his shirt, Jesse sees the red spots on Walter's chest and realizes for the first time that Walter has lung cancer. Jesse relates this to his aunt's symptoms, mentioning that she passed away in pain 7 months after starting chemotherapy. Jesse finally resolves his confusion, realizing that Walter is in this business to ensure his family is financially secure before he dies. Feeling that his current state no longer allows him to continue working, Walter asks Jesse to help finish the remaining work. Although Jesse was somewhat lacking in confidence, Walter still encouraged him, saying you can do it. Jesse feels deep sympathy for Walter's plight and works hard at night to stealthily distribute the goods. To make it easier to stay in touch with Walter, Jesse thoughtfully bought him a cell phone and then handed over Walter's share of the money. Because it's retail, Jesse's sales are far from meeting Walter's expectations. Seeing that the profits are completely disproportionate to the risks he's taking, Walter becomes anxious and demands that Jesse find a way to expand their distribution channels like dealing in wholesale quantities. However, Jesse, who has been in this line of work for years, knows the rules. The only dealer he knew, Crazy 8, is already dead. The one who took over Crazy 8's clients is a fierce Mexican dealer who won't do business without a familiar reference. Walter, unfamiliar with these rules, doesn't understand this. Jesse urges Walter to be content, noting that they're already making more money than in a regular job. Hearing this, Walter becomes furious, accusing Jesse of being too timid. Feeling helpless, Jesse didn't dare to argue because he also understood Walter's predicament. He not only had to bear the high medical costs but also needed to earn enough money for his family in a limited amount of time. As he sees the numbers on the bills dwindling, Walter finds himself out of options. The side effects of chemotherapy cause Walter to vomit daily. One day, while Walter was rinsing his mouth in the restroom, the kind-hearted janitor Hugo noticed Walter enduring the agony of his illness and kindly offered him a piece of his own gum. Back in the classroom, Walter is packing up to go home from work when Hank pays a surprise visit. It turned out that the gas masks they had found earlier were identified as belonging to Walter's school lab. Since Walter was there, Hank came to investigate. Walter pretended to know nothing about it. When Hank mentioned that Crazy 8 was an informant for the DEA and had been missing for many days, he suspected Crazy 8 had been killed by someone else. Walter struggled to hide his inner panic. Hank asked Walter if he had lost any gas masks, to which Walter said no. Hank asked to check the lab inventory and Walter had no reason to stop him, so they went to the lab together. Hank inquired who else had keys to the lab. Walter truthfully answered that the science teachers, the vice principal, and the janitor all had keys. After a careful check, it turned out that 2 gas masks and several glass containers were missing, exactly the kind of equipment needed for contraband. At that moment, the cell phone Jesse bought for Walter rang. Walter was going to not answer it, but Hank strongly urged him to pick up the phone because Hank was worried it might be Skylar. Walter had no choice but to move as far from Hank as possible to take the call. It turned out Jesse was calling to bring good news. His friend Skinny had been cellmates with Tuco and Skinny could vouch for him to broker a deal with Tuco. After hanging up, Walter pretended it was the doctor who had called. Hank had no suspicions of Walter and reminded him to keep an eye on his own turf. However, Hank's next comment sent shivers down Walter's spine.
We don't want people to start wondering about you, man.
What Hank never expected was that his joke was actually the reality. Meanwhile, Skinny took Jesse to meet with Tuco for the deal, but Tuco's territory was heavily guarded and getting to see him required going through several checks. Finally, they got to meet Tuco himself. Skinny went up to greet him, but Tuco completely ignored him. It seemed their relationship was not as good as Skinny had boasted. In an awkward moment, Skinny introduced Jesse to Tuco and Jesse took out the product he had brought. Tuco used a dagger to pick up a piece and then crushed it. The always cautious Tuco insisted Jesse try it first. After seeing there was no problem, Tuco tried it too, and indeed it was a masterpiece in the contraband world, exciting Tuco immensely with just one taste. Tuco asked Jesse where this came from. Jesse answered truthfully, but Tuco didn't believe him, and then Tuco told them to leave without any intention of paying. Seeing that Tuco completely disregarded Skinny, Jesse picked up his product and tried to escape but was quickly stopped by Tuco's man. Seeing the high purity of the product Jesse brought, Tuco took a bag of money from the safe and told Jesse to come and get it. Jesse cautiously went to take the money thinking he was about to succeed, but instead he was brutally beaten by Tuco. Tuco was truly ruthless in his attack, and it didn't take long for him to leave Jesse gasping for breath, declaring that no one but himself could do business there. This made Skinny finally understand his own position. Early the next morning, Hank came to Walter's school and took Hugo away while he was raising the flag, which was also seen by Walter, who had just arrived at the school. That evening when Hank came to play poker at his house, Walt Jr. was puzzled about Hugo's arrest that morning, thinking Hugo was a nice person, but Hank explained that Hugo had a criminal record and also had a key to the lab, making him the prime suspect in the theft of the lab equipment. The DEA also took this opportunity to search Hugo's car and house, and although they found a small amount of contraband, they did not find the missing equipment. Walter defended Hugo, saying he didn't seem like someone who would steal, but Hank advised him that this has nothing to do with personal feelings. It's hard to tell at first glance who is committing a crime. Ironically, this statement seems to speak to Hank himself, who because of his personal feelings really didn't see right away that Walter was committing a crime. Hank urged Walter to hurry up and place his bet, deciding to follow the bet himself. Everyone else thought their cards were too poor and folded, leaving only Walter and Hank in the showdown. This also symbolized their real-world struggle, with Hank investigating the case in the open while Walter continued his crimes in secret.
Dude, you bad, horrible liar. You smoking there, huh?
Walter pushed all his chips in, indicating he was ready to confront Hank to the end. Hank's statement also exactly described the real Walter, but Hank has no idea what's going on in Walter's mind. He guessed Walter must have got the big card with the hearts, because in Hank's mind Walter was never one to bluff, so he decisively folded. Walter won all the bets. Marie was speechless when she saw Hank's AK. Then she looked at Walter's tiny 2 and 7 of spades, which symbolized that Walter's heart was gradually darkening, and even Hank was no match for him. This perfect combination of classic dialogue and plot is precisely the charm of this show. After everyone left, Walter couldn't get in touch with Jesse. After taking a shower, he tried again, but this time it was Skinny who answered the phone, saying Jesse had been beaten and was now in the hospital. Walter rushed to the hospital and saw Jesse unconscious on the bed, which made him furious. He demanded that Skinny tell him everything he knew about Tuco. He decided to confront Tuco himself. Back at home, Walter saw his hair almost gone, so he decided to shave it all off. When Skylar saw the bald Walter, she was nearly taken aback, but Walter appeared very calm as his recent experiences had left him unshaken. He came to Tuco's place and he brought a bag of what looked like contraband. After going through several layers of checks, Walter finally met Tuco in person.
What's your name?
Heisenberg.
From then on, Walter officially started using the alias Heisenberg to make his mark in the contraband world. Tuco asked him his purpose for coming. Walter immediately demanded $50,000, $35,000 for the product Tuco had stolen and $15,000 as compensation for Jesse's medical expenses. Tuco laughed at Walter, calling him crazy, saying, "You an old man with no weapons come here asking for money, and even more ridiculously, you bring a bag of contraband with you." However, the next second Walter taught Tuco a lesson.
This is not meth.
In the chaos, Walter quickly took away a bag of explosives, and Tuco and his men dared not make a move. Seeing that Heisenberg was about to die with him, Tuco had to give him money to go and said that the last shipment Jesse had brought in had been a big seller, and he asked Walter to bring him another pound next week. Walter took the opportunity to raise the stakes, demanding a 2-pound minimum order, which Tuco agreed to quickly.
As long as we got an understanding.
1 pound is not gonna cut it. You have to take 2.
Tuco realized Heisenberg was talented and decided to work with him long-term. Walter, having triumphed, returned to his car, and looking at the money he had earned through his courage, he let out a shout. A thrill he had never experienced before. When his emotions calmed down, a slight evil smile appeared on Walter's face. From then on, Walter boldly walked the edge of the law, officially stepping onto the path of becoming the notorious dealer Heisenberg. Even when the DEA investigated the missing lab equipment at the school, Walter showed no fear. He even flirted with Skylar in public. This was in stark contrast to the once honest and dutiful Walter. Skylar's cooperation emboldened him even further, and after the meeting they had an intimate exchange in the car, audaciously next to a police vehicle.
Where did that come from? And Why was it so damn good?
Because it was illegal.
The evolved Walter continuously challenged the boundaries of law and morality. The next day, a refreshed Walter went to visit the injured Jesse, but he was greeted by a real estate agent instead. Because Crazy 8 and Emilio died in the house, Jesse worried it was haunted, planned to sell it. Jesse, having heard from Skinny that Walter had asked for Tuco's address, assumed Walter was planning revenge. Seeing Walter alive, Jesse was relieved he hadn't gone to confront Tuco, or he would have surely been killed by Tuco. However, Walter handed Jesse the money he got from Tuco and announced that he had already formed a partnership with Tuco. Hearing this, Jesse, ignoring his pain, stood up immediately, unable to understand why Walter would contract with the murderous Tuco. Moreover, they had to supply 2 pounds of product a week, which was impossible because they couldn't get that much raw material. The time for the first deal with Tuco came and Walter chose an abandoned car factory for the transaction. They both wore sunglasses to hide their fear of Tuco. Jesse mocked Walter's choice of location, saying it was a novice's choice. Real criminals would choose busy urban areas. He patiently explained the details of the deal to Walter. Soon Tuco's car approached them. Seeing Jesse's nervous and frightened look, Walter told him to hide and said he could handle it alone, but Jesse disagreed.
I'm no pussy.
After getting out of the car, Tuco first apologized for beating Jesse, saying to work with me you've got to pay some price, and didn't forget to mock Walter's choice of location, urging him to hurry up with the delivery. However, when Walter only brought out half a pound of the product, Tuco immediately became unhappy. Walter quickly explained there had been a production issue. Although Tuco gave him the money, he deducted $500 for Walter's breach of contract. Walter was just about to retort when Tuco's aura overpowered him. After humiliating Walter, Tuco turned to leave, but Walter stopped him. Walter greedily demanded Tuco prepay for next week's product, confident in the quality of his product and certain Tuco wouldn't refuse. Jesse looked at Walter in surprise. After some bargaining, they finally reached an agreement. Seeing his plan succeed, Walter boldly said even higher terms.
Can you handle 4 pounds?
Listen, old man. Talk is talk. But owing me money? That's bad.
After they left, Walter hurriedly picked up the money from the ground while Jesse thought Walter was simply crazy. Seeing that they couldn't even produce 2 pounds of the product, Walter agreed to provide 4 pounds, which Jesse thought was an impossible task. Yet Walter calmly wrote down a list, as he had already planned to change his method of making contraband. Hearing about Walter's plan B, Jesse looked at him with admiration. Walter then handed the meticulously prepared list to Jesse and asked him to go purchase these materials. Seeing the list, Jesse was completely baffled. He had never seen those items before, let alone knew how to procure them, so he thought about giving up. However, Walter immediately squashed any such thoughts in Jesse.
Is the first day of the rest of your life.
What are you doing?
This is the first day of the rest of your life, but what kind of life will it be, huh? Will it be a life of fear, of, oh no, I can't do this, of never once believing in yourself?
I don't know.
Listen, these things, we need them, and only you.
Seeing Walter's confidence in him, Jesse, who always craved recognition, found it impossible to refuse. The scene shifts to Skylar hosting a baby shower for her unborn daughter. Facing a pile of gifts from friends, Skylar opened each one and expressed her gratitude publicly. She was most surprised by the luxury tiara that her sister Marie had given. Skylar made polite comments about not needing to spend so much, but she was secretly thrilled. Seeing Marie happy, Hank on the other hand couldn't feel the same joy. Could it be he was upset about Marie spending so much on her sister? The depressed Hank dragged Walter out for a drink and even took out a box of cigars from his pocket to relieve his boredom. Unexpectedly, Walter, who never smoked, insisted on having one too. When Walter mentioned that these were illegal, Hank said that sometimes the forbidden fruit is the sweetest. Walter took this opportunity to gauge Hank's attitude towards illegal activities, but Hank's stance was zero tolerance. This meant that the relationship between Hank and Walter would inevitably break down sooner or later. That night, Skylar was still puzzled about why Marie would give such an expensive gift. Compared to diapers and baby formula, she needed these more, so she decided to exchange the tiara Marie had given her for cash. Walter took this opportunity to tell his wife he had found a treatment for lung cancer that required him to spend the weekend out of town. Skylar, having no suspicions, gladly agreed. These 2 days Walter could finally focus on making contraband with Jesse. Seeing Jesse had prepared everything he needed, Walter praised him for doing a great job. After Walter's careful inspection, he found they were still missing a crucial ingredient, methylamine. Jesse said this was hard to get as the raw materials were locked up in a warehouse in the south of the city. He had planned to hire some thieves to retrieve it, but the warehouse was heavily guarded and frequently locked, and the thieves asked for a high price, so he refused because Jesse had almost spent all his money on the other materials. That's when Walter saw a magnetic drawing board nearby and had a bold idea.
So why don't we just steal it ourselves?
Yeah? How are we gonna do that?
With this?
Soon they collected a bunch of these boards, and Walter gathered the iron filings from them and added a certain proportion of aluminum powder, creating a batch of ingredients for a thermite reaction. Jesse listened dumbfounded as Walter once again demonstrated the power of knowledge. That night the two timed their move perfectly, ready to act. Seeing the ski masks Walter had prepared, Jesse complained that they were too ugly, but they had no choice but to make do. Then Jesse cut through the wire fence and they sneaked in, nearly getting caught by a patrolling guard. Seeing the guard was heading to the restroom, they quickly tied the door shut with rope, then they hurried to the warehouse door. Next was the moment to witness a miracle. Walter ignited the device, and with a burst of sparks and lightning the door was successfully opened. Due to the illegal intrusion, the alarm automatically went off, leaving the guard trapped in the restroom completely baffled. However, when they entered the warehouse, they found there were no small barrels, and reluctantly they had to use all their strength to move a large barrel. The next day they planned to drive out to the countryside to start work, but unfortunately the RV broke down at a crucial moment, so they had to start working in Jesse's basement. With Walter's improved formula, their efficiency greatly increased, and they were even able to exceed their target. After their efforts, they were finally able to consistently produce large quantities of the product, meaning they would make a lot of money. Jesse asked Walter how much money he needed given his current situation. Walter hadn't really calculated it. With his current ambition, he just wanted as much as possible. Just then Jesse suddenly noticed someone approaching in the yard outside the window. It turned out to be the real estate agent showing the house. Walter peered out through the door crack, fortunately seeing only a clueless little girl. Walter asked Jesse to quickly find a way to get these people to leave, then he continued his work. Jesse stormed up from the basement and bluntly told them the house was no longer for sale, then he shooed everyone out. Meanwhile, Skylar went to the jewelry store intending to return the gift that Marie had given her. The store owner asked her to provide the receipt, but Skylar explained that it was a gift from someone else and she didn't have one. Seeing this, the owner called over an employee to watch Skylar while she phoned the police, leaving an innocent Skylar completely baffled. It turned out that the item was stolen merchandise from the store. Despite Skylar's insistent denials that she had never stolen anything, the owner didn't believe her and insisted she explain herself to the police. In a crucial moment, Skylar used her status as a pregnant woman to throw a tantrum and threaten them, successfully making her escape. An angry Skylar immediately called Marie, demanding she come over and explain herself right away. It turns out that Marie has a habit of stealing. When she bought the shoes earlier, she naturally left the old ones in the shop and left with the new ones as if nothing had happened. When Skylar received Marie's gift, she said this: "Marie always finds the best wrapping paper." These were all hints at Marie's habit of stealing. Hank obviously knew about his wife's bad habit, which was exactly why he had that speechless expression at Skylar's daughter's party. So he took Walter out to drown his sorrows in alcohol. Marie, knowing her behavior had been discovered by her sister, initially tried to avoid her, but eventually Skylar found her. Faced with her sisters questioning, Marie flatly denied everything. Faced with Marie's attitude, a frustrated Skylar angrily left. 2 days later, Walter returned home and his wife asked how his retreat went. Skylar also noticed a strange smell on him, but Walter deflected it naturally. Then Skylar shared the incident about Marie stealing the tiara. However, Walter showed sympathy for Marie, saying that sometimes people do illegal things for their family. Actually, he was testing Skylar's attitude towards such incidents, hoping if his wife discovered his secret, she might choose to forgive him, while also seeking some psychological comfort for his own crimes. This is a typical psychological state in the progressive development of criminal behavior, but Skylar believed that Walter would never do such things, which meant she could never accept Walter's actions. They were definitely heading for a big confrontation. The next day, Walter still chose the abandoned car factory to trade with Tuco, this time bringing enough product. Due to the change in the formula, this batch of product was blue, but Walter assured that its purity was even higher than before. Tuco tried it and immediately got excited. Tuco swiftly handed the money to Heisenberg, and because they were half a pound over, Tuco quickly instructed his men to top up the payment. Getting such top quality product made Tuco very happy, and he stood to make a good profit from it. Seeing the boss so happy, the side of the younger brother rushed to kiss his arse.
Just remember who you're working for.
Unexpectedly, this comment directly enraged Tuco as he felt his underling was stealing his lines. Seeing they were about to start fighting, Walter urged Tuco to relax a bit as he didn't want to see any violence.
Heisenberg says relax. Orale, Holmes. I'm relaxed. I'm relaxed. I'm relaxed.
The subordinate never expected his attempt to ingratiate himself would backfire so badly, a scene that left Walter and Jesse dumbfounded. Tuco was so ruthless with his own man, a typical example of making an example out of someone. By sacrificing a subordinate, he instilled fear in Heisenberg. Tuco had calculated this move very clearly. With this, the first season of Breaking Bad comes to an end. At least in this season, Walter's initial intent to make contraband hasn't changed. In the later episodes, Walter will become increasingly worse and the oppressive feeling towards others will also strengthen, but this self-sacrificial motive gives the audience a touching first impression, so even when Walter does many bad things later, it feels like he has his reasons, which is one of the most successful aspects of the show. It's a pity that many people give up due to the slow pace of the first season, because the more exciting story is yet to come.